I'm going to jump straight into, I think, the most important question of the show is, what is happening to our testosterone levels?
Yeah, it's scary, Steve. So we have 3 major studies that can help us understand what's happening with testosterone. There's the Male Massachusetts Aging Study, which is a longitudinal study out of the U.S. that looked at men over 20 years. And then there were 2 other studies, one in Sweden and one in Finland. Those were longitudinal studies as well that each went between 20 and 30 years. So 3 massive longitudinal studies, and they all showed the same thing. They showed that testosterone levels worldwide are declining at about a rate of 1% a year. What I mean by that is testosterone total was down about 30%. But what's more important is the free testosterone, and free testosterone we could talk about is much more important. That was down as much as 45% over 20 years. So to put that into perspective, what we mean by this is if you look at a 45-year-old male today, his free testosterone level is nearly half of a 45-year-old male 20 years ago. Pretty scary.
Wow. And do you have links to those studies on your website? It's tracygapin.com, and there's also the gapininstitute.com. But where can people get hold of those 3 studies? Because I know they're going to ask me. I've got a very sort of literate community.
I have all those references. Yeah, references for sure. And I've given talks on stage about this testosterone epidemic. And if you check me out on YouTube, there's a talk I give, talk about endocrine disruptors, which I think are the biggest culprit here. And I go through each of those studies and give references and links to all that published data for sure. What's interesting also, Steve, is there are studies, this great one out of Israel, that showed that fertility is down by almost identical proportion, meaning sperm count and sperm function is down almost 50% over that same time period. And it makes sense that we're experiencing likely damage to our gonads, to our testicles, that we believe is probably the underlying source of the issue here.
Brilliant. And I've been doing keynotes on hormonal health now for about 7 years, and it just seems that the medical community is not really concerned about this. When I speak to colleagues, when I speak to corporates, we do a lot of corporate wellness programs in the big banks here and big corporates here in South Africa and Africa, is there's no real concern. These people are unaware, generally, the person out there. Why is there just no understanding, no urgency with regards to testosterone?
Yeah, great question. There is just this complacency that we are fine, we're normal, everything is okay. And I'll look at a couple of reasons why. Number one, people tend to think about testosterone as simply related to sex and muscle. You know, it's all about sex drive, sexual performance, and how do I build more muscle in the gym. But I would contend that it's much more than that. You know, we know that testosterone is critically important when it comes to cognitive function, mental acuity, focus, concentration, memory, mood. You know, a lot of depression we see in men is at least partially related to issues with hormones, specifically testosterone. Testosterone is critically important for metabolic health. It's been shown to help improve metabolism, energy production, burning fat, building muscle, bone health. And here's the kicker, Steve. Over a dozen studies have shown that men with low testosterone have about a 30% increased risk of a major adverse cardiac event, cardiovascular disease, cardiovascular death, 30%. And so massive problem. And I believe the reason people aren't looking at this is in part because of misunderstanding of how important it is, but also because of the way labs are reported. So this is a key distinction here. When you look at a lab slip, LabCorp or Quest here in the US, whatever labs you're using internationally there in South Africa and other countries, they all do the same thing. Each lab will look at all the lab tests that they've run. So let's say this lab has done 1 billion testosterone levels. They simply look at what's the average. Of all the lab tests done, what's the average, or the median specifically, and then 2 standard deviations above and below that median gives you a bell curve like everything else in life, it seems. And that's your reference interval, your reference range, okay? So when you look at a lab slip, the right side of the screen is not where your levels should be or what's optimal or what's ideal. It's what's simply the average. Now, for most labs, you look at sodium levels, potassium, other electrolytes, liver enzymes. Those don't change from generation to the next. There's no variation. But in things like testosterone, we're seeing a massive decline. And so that reference range, which is now, depending on the lab, it may say like 240 up to 900 for total testosterone, something ridiculously wide. That range is plummeting every year. And so now you may get a lab result that's on the bottom end of that range, and you're being told it's normal, nothing to worry about. And that's honestly, in my opinion, Steve, one of the biggest reasons why there's not more attention to this, because people are being told your testosterone is normal.